Well, good afternoon, everyone. This is the Concern Forum, and today we're going to get into a bit of politics, in particular about the Democratic primary, but we also plan to branch off into other things. Now, we're living in pretty serious times here in America, and there's no pomp and ceremony here today. As a matter of fact, I'm going to roll my sleeves up and we're going to get down and grimy, as they say. I don't know how the rest of you feel, but I'm very concerned about this gentleman, Donald Trump, who is supposedly one of us New Yorkers. And to me, it seems that this gentleman is not campaigning in the Republican primary to run for president. Oh no. He gives me the distinct impression that he's running to be commander-in-chief of a lynch mob. And that's exactly how it sounds. I'm a fan of old movies, and especially some of those early movies that came out, like in the 1930s, as I'm checking my timer here. And these are the movies where, although at that time we weren't advanced enough as a society to actually talk about racism openly, they showed in the movies about how some poor innocent black person or Jewish person, like that case down in Atlanta, back around the turn of the last century, would be wrongfully accused of a crime, usually a crime of a Jewish person or a black person being accused of despoiling a white woman. And of course you had your regular arrested judgment, your lynch mob form, and the party would go on. And to me, that's the impression that I get out of what Donald Trump is doing. Now, we have today a young lady that's a volunteer with the Bernie Sanders campaign, and I got a few questions I want to ask her, but this is primarily going to be about her and in the sense of what she has to say about Senator Sanders' campaign. I don't like the way that the Republican side has attacked Bernie, or Hillary for that matter. O'Malley, my former neighbor from Maryland, they seem at this point to be trying to stay away from him. But they have really set their sights on Hillary, and also very much so on Bernie Sanders, trying to call him a communist. He's not a communist. He is a democratic socialist. And most Americans need to keep in mind the fact that all of our allies in Europe have governments that either they're being run by socialist Democrats or they're being run in conjunction with social Democrats. And if these people are good enough to be our allies and to fight with us as we go on our wild escapades in the Middle East, then surely it shouldn't be such a big deal for us to have a social democrat running for president of the United States. Now, as I said, I have a guest from the Bernie's campaign, and her name is?
My name is Jessica Frisco.
Okay. And she is one of his ace volunteers. Now, one question I want to lead off with is, Jessica, why Bernie? You're a young woman. What is it about this, I don't want to call him elderly, because we all have to get there someday, hopefully, but what is it about this gentleman that attracts you and others like you to his campaign?
Sure. Well, the issues that Bernie is raising and his stance on a lot of these issues is aligned with my personal beliefs. He wants, free public colleges for all students, which I think is essential if we're going to be globally competitive. He wants healthcare for all people in the country. He thinks we should be investing more in schools rather than prisons, which is kind of incredible that we're not doing that already. And he's advocating for holding corporations responsible for paying their fair share in taxes and being responsible in that sense. But really the most significant reason that I support him is because he doesn't accept money from billionaires or super PACs or Wall Street. And that's really, that's the factor that makes him unique in this campaign. It sets him apart from all the other candidates. And it's so important to understand why that is a distinctive factor about his campaign. So back in 2010, we had the Citizens United ruling by the Supreme Court, which essentially allowed corporations, massive corporations, to be defined as people for the sake of campaign finance. So corporations are not allowed to directly contribute to campaigns, but they have created these things called super PACs where they can literally pour unlimited amounts of money into campaigns. So you have someone, let's say for example, who's running for Senate, and he might be pro-gun, anti-gun control.
Okay.
So you can have the NRA say, we like this candidate, we want him in office because he's going to advocate against gun control. So the NRA, considered a person, can donate, millions of dollars to back this candidate and get him to office. And so the super PAC that they're funding can run commercials for him, they can advocate for him, they can do all these things to support that candidate's campaign and essentially put him in office. And so then that candidate kind of has an obligation to the NRA or, feels slightly indebted to them because they have brought him into office. And so even on issues like gun control, where the majority of the country wants some gun control, they don't want terrorists to be able to buy guns, they don't want people to be able to get guns without background checks. This candidate is not representing those interests, he's representing the interests of the NRA. And so, and that's true on both sides of the political spectrum for Democrats and Republicans, and it's true on so many issues, climate change, closing for-profit prisons, the minimum wage, all these issues are kind of being controlled by the people with the most amount of money.
Correct.
So what's unique about Senator Sanders' campaign is that he's not indebted to any of these people. He's not representing the interests of massive corporations or billionaires or Wall Street. He's taking money from me, from you, from small $25 campaign donations. And so when he becomes president, he's going to be answering to the people who have, helped to fund his campaign, and it's not those special interest groups.
It will be us, the citizenry.
Exactly.
Well, when you talk about Bernie and then, his opposition within the party, well, let's face it, O'Malley, he's an okay guy, but he's really low in the polls. So we're talking about Hillary. The way I see it, and I must have, I have to say this, because it's my show, and I don't want to play fast and loose with the truth, number one, and number two, as I promised when I first began, I would always shoot for transparency. So, in all transparency, I am a definite, serious supporter of Bernie Sanders. There's no two ways about it. However, I do have a certain amount of respect for the Clintons, for Hillary. I don't see Hillary as a nightmare, but what I do see, putting Bernie and Hillary side by side, I look at Bernie, and I can remember Bernie from when I was a little kid, okay? And we would have the civil rights marches and what have you. And I can remember seeing Bernie Sanders out there. I think he even marched with King a couple of times, if I'm not mistaken. Hillary, I know in her early days she was a Republican and a supporter of Barry Goldwater. And we're talking about money and about the Supreme Court ruling, well, again, in the interest of transparency, Hillary gets a huge amount from corporations, and especially not just so much corporations, but Wall Street.
Mm-hmm.
Now, our problems that we had in '08 and '09 basically revolved around Wall Street. And the thing that worries me about Hillary, I believe she's a good person, no doubt in my mind. But I have a problem with her or anyone being so beholden to Wall Street. Now, I'm not trying to be funny, but ain't these the folks that she is supposed to ride herd on? I mean, I have a problem when you say, okay, we're making you sheriff, but then I find out that you party and hang out with the wrestlers.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel that this is kind of the situation that we have here. And so I'm assuming, and I know you should never assume, but I get the feeling that that's why you and folks like yourself feel that you're more comfortable with a Bernie Sanders in the White House as opposed to a Hillary Clinton.
Mm-hmm.
Is that?
Yeah, I think
Okay.
you nailed it. I think that, we have these candidates like Hillary Clinton or, other people that have been running for office who we'd like to believe are champions for the people. But then you see, Hillary Clinton has a history of taking money from Wall Street, from big banks, and it's really hard to believe that she's going to say, okay, yeah, I'm taking $2 million from you, and now I'm going to turn around and make it difficult for you to, continue doing your business. And, it's just natural for if someone gives you a favor or helps you out in some way, for you to want to return that favor. And so she can say, I want to regulate the big banks, I want to, flip Wall Street and make corporations pay higher taxes and whatever. But if they're doing favors for her and she's continually taking money from them, it's very difficult to believe that she's going to actually, pass laws that restrict them further. And so her authenticity and her trustworthiness in that sense is really hard to believe, especially compared with Bernie Sanders.
Okay. On another subject, and this might seem slightly convoluted, just because of the very nature of things. By that I mean Hillary is a woman, Bernie is a man. Would you say that in the issues regarding women's rights, women's health, those type of issues, also in terms of women in the workplace, leave policy for childbirth, etc., who do you feel more comfortable with and why? Hillary or Bernie?
Well, I will say that they both do have strong policies that advocate for women. They both want equal pay for women, and Hillary's been especially vocal about that. I think she's playing it to her advantage because she is a woman, and so she's kind of bringing that into the spotlight. She's also spent a lot of time advocating for women and children's rights ever since she left law school. That's kind of been her core issue that she's been championing. So I don't want to say that Bernie is completely better than her in that respect. But I will say that Bernie has been advocating for paid maternity leave, which is something that I haven't really heard Hillary speak about that much. I think Hillary's a little bit more pro-business than Bernie, and I think that she will have a hard time, for the reasons that we discussed before, mandating that businesses have paid maternity leave, so that when a woman has a baby, she gets 6 months of leave that's paid. Bernie has been unwavering in that. He said this is absolutely essential for us to have. It's every other high-income country in the world has this law that if a woman has a baby, she gets to leave and bond with that baby and not lose wages because of it. And I really haven't heard Hillary come out as strongly on that. that as I have with Bernie.
Well, as we discussed earlier, I spent a lot of time in the military, and I was especially spending a lot of time in the so-called Middle East. There's a reason why I always say so-called Middle East, but I'm not going to get into that now. And a lot of time in Western Europe. And I have seen how people live and work. Now, granted, that was before we have this big snafu of the hundreds of thousands of refugees coming up from Syria and Afghanistan. That's something that's happened relatively, just a short time ago. So, of course, a huge influx of people from another part of the world, that's going to cause a certain amount of, dislocation, problems, etc. But generally speaking, the things that impressed me the most when I was in Europe and, going through like Germany, Belgium, France, Italy, Luxembourg, even Britain, is the way that they seem to be able to allow a woman to work but not penalize her for being a woman, not penalize her for having a child, as we do here in the States. Mm-hmm. And you don't find the instances of, have you ever been to Europe, by the way?
Yes, I have.
Okay. As a student or visiting?
Just a traveler.
Okay, okay. Because that's one of the things I picked up from, living over there. You don't have this whole big issue in terms of violence against women. And why do you think that is, by the way?
Well, I guess partially because America was founded on this idea of capitalism and that, hard work is rewarded with money. And I think that, it's more individualism here, whereas in European countries, it's more socialist. I mean, Bernie keeps rehashing this idea of democratic socialism, but I think there's a sense of collective unity where people feel a responsibility to take care of each other. And here, I think that maybe we have that to some extent, but I think the idea of getting ahead and making more money and, catapulting yourself to the top really is the priority rather than having a society in which we all look out for each other. And so I think that especially businesses or, just the country in general, we have this culture of individualism rather than socialism.
Okay. I agree with you on that because it's primarily about Bernie, but it's also what we're discussing here today. It also dovetails into who and what we are as a society. And Americans, I know this especially on the conservative side, on the Republican side, especially nowadays, they go in for this thing about, just like you said, individualism, the rugged individualist, I'm John Wayne, I can do it all myself, right? Even God didn't help me. And I think sometimes one of our problems that we have as Americans is we like to BS ourselves a lot. Like you brought up the thing about working as a collective, for collective unity in order to accomplish, a stated goal, right? Well, if you study American history, really get into it, you'll look and you'll see that there have been many times in our history, we didn't make a big deal about it, most of the time we didn't have a person that would stand up and in loud stentorian tones and say, now we must work as a collective to accomplish goal A, B, and C. But we just did it, right? The early settlers at Jamestown, okay? The early settlers up at Plymouth, for example. There was a time when they knew that they would have to work together or everything would come apart. It wasn't about, well, this little trinket or medallion that you got from your grandma, that has to be thrown in the communal pot. No, it wasn't about that. But it was about the fact that there were certain things that had to be done as a community. And that's how the West was won. It was won by democratic socialism, you know, because when you sit down and you think about it, oh, well, we're trying to make a goal of making it in this area here, and we have to be able to farm, to protect ourselves, so on and so forth. Bring up water, okay? And all these things were done as a group. It wasn't one individual or rugged individualism that won the West. It was people voting on what best way to do goal A, and then once that was decided by the community, then everyone would have to pitch in and help. Even when it came to fighting, here in New York State, upstate New York, during the Revolutionary War, everybody from the age of 17 to 65 would have to show up for militia duty. If not, they were promptly hanged, because they realized that in unity there lay strength. And I just wonder sometimes, and it also really makes me angry when I hear Bernie being attacked, especially by Republicans, about this whole thing about, oh, well, he's just a commie socialist. And their average base person in their base couldn't give you a half-decent functioning definition of a communist from a socialist, you know. And I really like it when folks like you come along and try and stand up to this madness. Because to hear Donald Trump put it, this country was built and became great because you had white Protestant men who did everything on their own, no help with anyone. And the women were over here on the shelf. The blacks were down there somewhere playing the banjo. Latino people. I don't think he realizes that the first people that came into what we now know as the United States were the Spaniards, and the mixture of the Spaniards, the native indigenous people, and the African slaves basically combined to have what we now call Latinos or Hispanic. And that's another thing that I find very scary about the Republican Party nowadays. And it's strange because I grew up in the Republican family. My dad, and I always tell people, my dad was the district leader in West Harlem back in the 50s and early 60s. But that was a different Republican Party. That's before they became a lynch mob. Now, you also had something in terms of protection of women, and I believe you were going to tell me how Bernie feels about that.
Protection of women?
Yeah.
In what sense?
You know, protecting from violence. Okay. Also in terms of women's health.
Did you mean the racial platform that he's?
Oh, we're going to get to that.
Okay.
But how does Bernie feel in terms of women's health care, number one, as opposed to Hillary?
Well, to be honest, I think that their platforms are very similar. I think that Bernie's platform is about giving women the ultimate choice over their bodies.
That's what I'm getting at.
Yeah, he thinks that it's absurd that we have male politicians who are making these laws that tell women what they can do and what they can't do with their bodies, not just with abortion, but just with anything. I mean, with maternity leave, with birth control, with abortion, with just all these health issues that are specific to women. And we have these male politicians who are making the laws about them, and he just thinks that's completely wrong. And that's very similar, obviously, to what Hillary Clinton is pushing. So I don't think that they're really that different on their policies in that sense.
Okay. The way I, because the way I see it, having been married and having had, my wife and myself, having had kids and what have you, I get to the point listening to the Republicans, all of them, when they start talking about women's issues, because what they're trying to do, they're trying to say that, well, not trying to, they actually are saying and implying that the whole question about abortion rights, see, now, they are so hypocritical, because it just flashed through my mind. They hate the idea of democratic socialism or collectivism of any type. But when it comes to a subject such as abortion, they feel that they have the right as a collective to determine whether or not you should carry the term. See, that is a collective act, because when you ask, or when you say you want the state to intervene on anything, okay, that's collectivism.
Right. I completely agree, and I think especially there's a huge contrast between their ideas for gun control and their ideas on abortion. They think that anyone should be able to get a gun, go to a gun show and purchase a gun without background check, without any waiting period, without government regulations. But then you have women who want an abortion or want the choice for an abortion because having a baby is going to impact their life drastically. It could possibly kill them if they have a baby. If it was an instance of rape and they want to, not have the baby, they should have the right to do that. And Republicans are saying, well, for that case, we're going to we're going to have the government prevent you from having a safe abortion. We're going to, regulate it, make it difficult, not give you access to birth control. We're going to defund Planned Parenthood. And so you have, on one hand, they're saying absolute freedom and no government regulation, but then when it comes to controlling women's bodies, they say, oh, we want all the regulations, and we want to completely outlaw choice.
See, that's, oh boy. Now, for a minute, I'm going to give Donald a break. I'm not going to beat on him for a couple of minutes. And I'm going to look at Mr. Rubio. Now, Marco, which is, by the way, see, this is what I try to get across to people. All these things dovetail. Now, right now, at this point in the conversation, we're talking about, choice, women's physical and biological freedoms, right? But a few moments ago, we were discussing the whole campaign finance deal. If you get money from me, Joe Millionaire, then of course I'm going to be expecting you as my candidate, as my guy, to see things a certain way. Now, talking about Rubio says that if his daughter was raped, if I'm not mistaken, he wouldn't answer that question. But where I tripped up on was the fact that he didn't say anything about his daughter. What he said was that if a woman's raped, that she should still be made to carry to term. And what I wanted to say was that the reporters at that particular gathering should have asked him, well, hey, if your daughter gets raped, God forbid, by some thuggish maniac, would you still want her to carry it to term? See? And he hasn't answered that question. But going back to what you were speaking of earlier about this whole problem that we have about money and politics, Marco Rubio, his whole campaign is subsisting off of that gambling guy. What is his name? Shillman. He has these huge casinos in Vegas, and also working out a deal with the Chinese in Macau, which used to belong to Portugal, and the whole Chinese area there. And that's a perfect example of these super rich donors influencing our politics. So just now, you've actually set it up so that we are killing two birds with one stone: money in politics and women's rights. Now, I consider Rubio to be a definite lightweight. Okay. The old expression that Mom used to tell you, oh, well, how do you think you're going to get there? On your good looks? Well, Marco feels, and to a large extent, he has gotten where he's gotten on his good looks. And he has said some very nasty things about Bernie. He's also a liar. Unfortunately, too many Americans think that the word politician and liar are synonymous with each other, and that's not true. Either you have character or you don't. I don't care if you're a lumberjack or a coal miner, And this is what I think about in terms of Rubio, because this guy, I think his first name is Donald too. I just can't remember.
Marco. His
benefactor.
Gotcha.
Yeah. This guy is worth something like, what is that, about the fourth or fifth richest guy on the planet. And he he's put it out there, I'm going to have whoever I like, I will bless with, zillions of bucks to basically carry out the plans and policies that I believe in. And that is so dangerous. And see, that's something else that I think that people in this country really need to realize. Look, folks, there are a lot of reasons why Election Day you just want to stay home, watch a tape, drink a beer, whatever, and just not be bothered with it. And I know that feeling. I understand that feeling. But keep in mind that that is exactly what they, and I'll be honest about it, and I'll be transparent about it, the conservative side, the Republican side, that's what they want you to do. They want you to stay home because it has been proven time and time again with facts and figures that the right wing, the conservatives, the people that don't want to see this country move forward, they are the ones that benefit when we have low voter turnout. And see, this is something women, Black and Latino, Native American, working class white people, all of you've got to stop playing their game. They want you to stay home. You got to get up off your duff and go out there and vote. One of the things that angers me the most as a registered Democrat, as a progressive, is the fact that my party is not raising the hell that they should be raising about the attempts primarily centered in the 11 states of the old Confederacy to prevent people of color and young whites, especially in college. They're trying to prevent them from being able to vote. That should tell you something. A party, their main thing is about trying to keep people away from the polls and getting huge amounts of money from millionaires and billionaires. It spells it all out for you.
And that's something that Bernie is really pushing for. I mean, he said we need to make Election Day a federal holiday. It needs to be paid so that people who are at work all day aren't losing wages by waiting in the poll lines for 7 to 8 hours, which is the case in a lot of communities. We need to have every person, as soon as they're 18, be automatically registered to vote. Right now you have lots of people who aren't registered to vote. You have voter ID laws where you need to show your ID when you go to the polls. Now, 11% of the country doesn't have an ID, and it's disproportionately Black and Latinos, and so their voices are being muted because they are not eligible to vote.
You know, as you bring it up, I'm a member of Black Lives Matter here in Manhattan. How do you feel the relationship stands between Bernie and Black Lives Matter?
Well, Bernie has been in the press a couple of times. He was interrupted, I think, at one speech by Black Lives Matter activists. And I think people in the Black Lives Matter movement are kind of skeptical. As, you know, how can this white guy from Vermont really advocate for the issues we care about? And I think that's a valid concern. But if you look at Bernie's history, he has consistently advocated for civil rights, for issues that are important to the Black community. When he was in college, he marched for Martin Luther King. He got arrested actually at a civil rights protest, and that was just when he was in college. And ever since then, you know, the past 60 years of his life, he's been consistent in his advocacy. He passed a law in the 1990s that reduced discrimination, and he actually just put out a 4-point plan to fight racial injustice.
Tell me about that.
Sure. So I have it here. It's 10 pages long. It's very dense, very comprehensive. He's the only candidate running right now for president who has something of this scope. He goes through physical violence, economic violence, legal violence, and political violence. And those are the 4 types of violence that he says are inflicted upon racial minorities. And so he describes the scope of the issue among each of those types of violence, and then he outlines specific things that we can do to combat that. And like I said, he's the only candidate that's really gone into detail for each of these things.
Tell us, tell me and the folks out in the audience some of these points.
Sure. So he acknowledges physical violence is a huge issue against blacks, especially as we've seen with police brutality. He's spoken out and mentioned Sandra Bland. He was actually the first candidate to mention how disgusting it was that Sandra Bland, forgot to turn on her signal light. She was yanked out of her car. She was physically and verbally assaulted by the police officer, arrested, thrown in jail, and died 3 days later.
Oh, that was in Texas, right?
Yes.
Okay, that's the story. She was she was from Illinois or something?
She was from Georgia. She was going across country to start a new job.
Right. Yeah.
And so he brings that up all the time. He says it's absurd. If that was a white woman, that probably would never have happened. And he mentions, lots of other people, Eric Garner and Walter Scott and Freddie Gray. He actually just visited Freddie Gray's neighborhood. And so he's trying to shed light on these issues more so than has already been done. He says that African Americans are 4 times more likely to experience the use of force during encounters with the police compared with white people. They're twice as likely to be arrested. And in general, there's a sense of distrust among black communities in regards to the police, and it's justifiable. So he says that we must demilitarize our police forces so that they don't look like armies. They look representative of the communities that they're serving.
Yeah.
You need people who, police officers who are black, who are Latino, who represent the demographics that they're serving in. Because if you have a police force that's just all white people and they're working in a low-income black neighborhood, obviously there's going to be a sense of distrust and a sense that these police officers have no idea what we're experiencing, and that creates tension, it creates discrimination, and we need to act to fix that.
Okay.
We also need to create more of a culture where bad police officers can be reported by good police officers. So right now it's kind of, if one police officer continually discriminates against black people or, is seen to be violent disproportionately against people who don't deserve it,
Right.
their fellow police officers kind of feel like maybe they shouldn't say anything, or maybe they should just kind of sweep it under the rug because they don't want any backlash. They don't want to lose their jobs. They don't want to take the risk of reporting their fellow police officers, because obviously if you're working with someone, you don't want to bash your colleague because it could come back to
The blue wall.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So Bernie is advocating strongly for laws that will really reshape police culture so that good police officers can feel safe reporting these bad behaviors that they see.
Okay.
He also, one of the last points for this is requiring body cameras for law enforcement officers. And that's something that's been thrown out every time there's an act of police brutality. But he really thinks it's important because that is the only way to really hold people accountable and to shed light on the things that are happening.
I think that that is a great document. I haven't heard that much on this particular subject from Hillary's camp. Now, I've called before. This week coming up, I'm going to be calling again so that they could send someone over here so that they could have a chance to, talk to, say their side of what it is that their campaign is all about. I've even reached out to the Republicans here in New York City and New York State to send someone to come by the show. Maybe after this is shown, I believe it's going to be next Saturday. Maybe after a few people see that, anybody who knows any Republican, or if you are a Republican yourself, please put the word out that I would love to have you on the show. So that way you can, the Republicans can state their own case, because all we have to go on is what we see on TV and what we read in the newspapers, and so far, guys, it doesn't look that good. So if there are things that you feel need to be cleared up, if you feel I'm saying things about the Republican Party that are unfair or even biased, by all means, I'd love to have you come on the show. All right? This young lady had the courage to come on this show and deal with me and my ham-handed, clumsy-footed way of asking questions. And I'm sure if she can do it, you have somebody in your bullpen that would be willing to come and subject themselves to the same humiliation and abuse, okay? But this is America, and we have a chance to speak in this country, and I'd be more comfortable with one of your folks being here speaking and allowing me to ask them questions. So let's get that out there, as we say, get that word out on the street. Republicans want it for the Concerned Forum to say their side of the story. Getting back to this, Hillary has spoken about the subject of racial justice. Now, she has done that. The problem that many of us in the community feel is that it's, she says things that are, of course, favorable, towards, the concept of racial justice, about police departments keeping racial justice in mind. But it doesn't seem like it's something that sets her hair on fire, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, and she's actually, she has, come out and said that Black lives do matter and we need to change our policies around them. But if you look at the laws that she's passed in in recent history, actually, or laws that Bill Clinton has passed, which she strongly advocated for, they've actually been, these tough on crime laws that have disproportionately jailed Black and Latino Americans, especially low income. And maybe she can realize now that those laws were a mistake, but if you look at the things that she was advocating for in the 1990s, they actually have contributed to this problem of mass incarceration among Blacks and discrimination among Blacks. And that was kind of the trend from the 80s onward, but her policies that she advocated for did contribute to them. Whereas in comparison with Bernie, he has been consistent for the last 40 years. He's been advocating for the same exact policies, and he's never looked back and said, oh, that was a bad idea, I changed my mind, as has Hillary.
Yeah. Well, I can tell you that especially for the 80s and the 90s, because for most of that time period I was, in the military for the second time, and I can remember coming back to New York on leave to visit, and it would seem that more and more guys would be just vacant, be absent from the community. And we know now that that was a result with all of those draconian laws that the Clintons ran through. I understand in the 90s they were trying to prove to conservative America, i.e. especially the South, especially in their first term, that they were tough on crime. Okay? So the way that conservatives, Republicans feel about showing that how you show you're tough on crime. Oh, well, you fill the jail up with a lot of Black, Latinos, and a few working class whites. So that way you get your credentials for being tough on crime. Not stopping to think that by what you're doing, you are actually contributing to the crime, because you take away the young men off the street. The kids coming up, they have no one there for guidance. Now, I'm born and raised in Harlem, but at the time that I was coming through, not to date myself, but at that time, the thing was, you finished high school, either you did the 4 years and graduated, or you went and dropped out, got a GED, you went in the military, or you went to community college, or you did something along those lines. And that was your passage. Now, talking about the guys, that was your passage into manhood. Now, that passage is about, well, yeah, I did a bid up in Sing Sing or at Denimora, and this is coming out of the mouths of 21-year-olds, 20-year-olds, and I'm like, my God, these people are helping you. And when I say these people, I mean these people that supposedly run the system. They're helping you make a sitting duck out of yourself. And when you look at a guy that has been constantly, dealing with the criminal justice system, and you look at him 35, 40, and there's something missing, There's no sparkle. Either they turn out to be very, very hard, right? Or they turn out to be like broken, weak old men. And we're talking about cats, 35, 40. So that is something, I know that was not purposely, that was not maybe what was in their hearts, but that's what their draconian laws wound up doing to my community. And until I actually hear Hillary come out and say, I am not going to make the mistake that my husband made back in the 90s and literally rape the communities of color, especially with their male population, because that doesn't help. It doesn't help the taxpayer. It doesn't help the individual that you're locking up. And this is something that really needs to stop. Hell, even some Southern conservatives. What's that idiot out of Virginia? The preacher with the television show. What is that guy's name? Yeah, he comes on all the time on TV. Mm-hmm. He ran for president one time. He got caught up because he said he was a combat Marine, and the truth was his old man was a senator and used some pull, so he didn't have to go to the front lines in Korea during the Korean War. But if I think about it before we finish, I'll call his name out. But even he is trying to come up with some kind of plan that would lessen these ridiculously, the whole emphasis being on jail. Mm-hmm. A place like South Carolina, I remember several years ago, somebody was telling me about someone we both knew, wound up having to do like about 15 years for a dime bag of marijuana.
Right, and that's something that Bernie has come out again. He's saying it's ridiculous that we have thousands and thousands and thousands of people going to jail for years for having marijuana, and it's obviously disproportionately impacting low-income Black and Latino communities. He's also strongly advocating to close for-profit prisons. It's kind of absurd that certain prisons can make a profit off of locking people away. Prisons should be based specifically on the facts and justice, and there should be no financial incentive for putting someone in jail. It's just kind of absurd that we have that system in place. And he's really the strongest candidate in terms of closing for-profit prisons. But as you were saying before about Hillary Clinton, not coming out and apologizing, I guess, for the policy she's advocated for, I want to touch on that and kind of draw the contrast between her and Bernie, just because she does have a lot of policies that she's advocated for in the past that she's flipped on. For example, gay rights. She was strongly against gay marriage back 20 years ago, whereas Bernie, you can see his speech in Congress. He was saying it's ridiculous that we're discriminating against gays. Gays should get equal treatment in the military. They should be allowed to marry. And that's obviously a popular view now that Hillary Clinton has adopted, but it wasn't always her view. Same thing with the Trans-Pacific Partnership. She initially was advocating for it, and now she is completely against it. And Bernie has always been against it. He knew it was a bad idea from the start. He hasn't changed his mind, and now Hillary has adopted his idea. Same thing with the Iraq War. Very few people voted against the Iraq War. Bernie came out and said, this is a bad idea. It's going to do way more harm than good. We're going to have people, veterans suffering for years as a consequence of the war. It's going to cost us trillions of dollars. It's going to cause unrest and, unravel the government system in the Middle East, which it has. And so he had a very insightful speech in front of Congress, advocating against the Iraq War, and that all turned out to be true, whereas Hillary Clinton was for it, and now she says, I look back on it and it was a bad idea. And I understand that, people make mistakes, and it's fair to change your mind looking back in hindsight, but I think that at this time in our country, we need someone who can really make the politically difficult decisions, stand up against people who are saying, that's not going to work, or that's a stupid idea, or that's not politically popular. And Bernie has shown throughout the past 40 years that he stands up for what is right, and he has this insight into the future that he's generally been correct on most of his policies the first time around. And I think that's what defines a leader, is someone who can really move the country in the correct direction, and not just look back and say, that would have been the correct move, and that would have been the correct move. Because that, anyone can do that. Anyone can make the right decisions in hindsight. Anyone
can prognosticate looking backwards.
Exactly.
But one thing that you said, like the whole thing about gays in the military. Now, I remember the Clintons were very kind of ambiguous about that. And the only reason for that was because, once again, they were scared to have to fight the right wing. And that doesn't show leadership to me. Okay, I happen to know, I knew quite a few guys when I was in the Navy, and even before that, when I was a kid and I was in the Army doing that were, they were gay, and they were soldiers, they were sailors, just like we all were. When I was under Nimitz, I had a couple, quite a few friends, shipmates that happened to be gay, and they knew, they did their thing. I did mine. Those of us who were straight, we did our thing, and gay folks, of course, back then, because we're talking now about the 80s, they had to be very circumspect, but they, like when we went overseas, they knew how to, how to handle themselves. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that they were not bad sailors. They were not bad naval officers. In many cases, they were highly effective. Only, I mean, a lot of us knew about it, but nobody was going to go and squeal. Now, I guess in some units that did happen, but I was fortunate. I was never in a unit like that where people say, "Hey, so and so was gay," and make a big deal about it. They were just accepted as a fellow shipmate, and that was that. That noise you're hearing, ladies and gentlemen, is one of our technicians coming through to check on things. So, no, we did pay the rent, not closing us out. But elaborate, if you will, on how does Hillary compare herself to Bernie on these kind of issues about, for example, the gay question. I say that because, I ask you that because she now tries to paint herself, both her and Bill are doing this nowadays, painting themselves as friends and protectors of American gay people. And I just find it so ironic that when gay people really needed a friend, I'm not saying that they totally turned their back on them, but there were things that they could have done back then that they didn't do. And what Bernie, as you say, has always stood for. I mean, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think, I guess for the sake of time, invite people to research his plan and compare with Hillary's plan or lack thereof. I would say to go to BernieSanders.com and to learn more about his issues, and you can see how they contrast with Hillary's.
Okay. Well, unfortunately, it seems like we're getting pretty short on time. Having such a great time with this conversation, I tell you. She will be back, folks. Don't worry about that. This is Bob. And
I'm Jessica.
With the Concerned Forum, and we thank you for inviting us into your home. And have a great day.